If you are going to drink any kind of alcohol and you want to be health conscious about it, by far the best option you can have is drinking Jumai sake, the most versatile drink in the world. Exports out of Japan should be 3 times what they are today. For this to happen, you need a few iconic brands that put sake on the map. How do you now break sake into mainstream culture?
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Carl, who is a co-founder and creative director of Heaven Sake, a sake brand that is modernizing the beverage to the current times. We talked before with John Gauntner and Julia, who basically shared some insights into the brewing methods and the industry and how it is now, and some of its struggles. But you have a lot of ideas of how to modernize this, how to make this attractive, and how to educate people on what this beautiful Japanese drink is. We're going to talk a lot about this today, but maybe to start with a little bit about you. What kind of got you interested in Japan in the first place? You currently don't live in Japan, is that correct?
I live in Italy, but I'm French, and so I grew up with all the Japanese anime when I was a kid. We had Dragon Ball was huge, Saint Seiya, Captain Tsubasa. So many of them actually. Sailor Moon, it's endless. The list is endless. So I grew up with that culture around me, and I found their sense of humor good. I found the aesthetics good, the storytelling. So for me, it was always a fascination and a dream to go to Japan. I just didn't know or expect that it would hit me in such a beautiful way that I would make it part of my life so much.
When was the first time you actually got to visit Japan?
That's 15 years ago.
Do you remember your first trip, arriving here with everything
I remember
in your
very,
mind?
very well. It was an absolute dream. I was also very lucky to come here with a Japanese woman who was the wife of a very dear friend, is a famous photographer called Michel Comte. He is married to a Japanese woman called Ayako. And my father had passed away a bit before, like a year or two before that. And so it was, for me, it was almost like I did that trip the way I would have wanted to be with my dad. And so Michel sort of took that role a little bit on, and Ayako organized all these beautiful experiences, and they made me fall in love with Japan.
Was this a time also when you discovered sake?
Yes and no. It's the first time that I discovered really high-end Jumai Ginjo sake. I had tasted it before in a few occasions in restaurants throughout Europe, but it was always presented most at the beginning of the course in a little, sort of like the little welcome shot. Mm-hmm. And I found the taste, it presented like this, it just tasted a bit flat. It didn't have anything that I found very intriguing. So it just didn't occur to me as something that was very interesting. And then discovering it in Japan, that was another experience, yeah.
Because the state of sake or Nihonshu in Europe is not very developed. I know there is La Maison du Sake in Paris, who is also trying to modernize things, make it more accessible. But generally speaking, people don't know about this, especially, France, Italy, it's the countries of wine.
Sure.
So how does your interest kind of grow into this? What made you kind of so interested to the point of kind of starting a brand?
My personal relationship grew because of just a health benefit, for lack of a better word. For me, if you are going to drink any kind of alcohol and you want to be health conscious about it, by far the best option you can have is drinking Jumai sake. It's very important, this difference between the Jumai and the other sakes, because in the other sakes there is distilled alcohol added to it. So there's two different chemical bases. Human beings have been using fermentation for about 15,000 years. It's actually very interesting if you go look at the history of a village in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. They found that they were using fermentation to celebrate the gods. They were getting high basically, but they had different, it was not the same, obviously not the same, they didn't have the same fruits or vegetables as we have, the same concepts, but they could retrace and find that they were using fermentation to have a bit of fun. And distillation is a much more complex process. And so in the fermentation, you will only have ethanol, which is what gives you the little buzz. Distillation has two other compounds that do not exist in the fermentation. And in the distillation, there's methanol, which is a very, very toxic compound. So for me, the difference if I drink Junmai sake or non-Junmai sake and the way it affects me the next day or even when I'm shortly after drinking it. If you just have one glass, you don't feel the difference, but with sake, it rarely remains at one glass. So it's just, for me, it's day and night. I just can only talk from my personal experience. And so the low acidity, I always had a very, very sensitive stomach, which I think is a good thing. It's just my body telling me, hey, look, like this is somehow creating a negative reaction inside your body. Listen to it, And so the low acidity of the sake, it's significantly lower than wine. The low ABV, obviously fantastic taste. That was obviously the base. It's an upper, which I think was also very important in my personal decision to say, well, this needs to be shared with the world. Low acidity, okay, that's one thing. Nice taste, great story. But if it's a bit of sort of a mellower, like red wine can be, sometimes you're not really solving the problem that people are, looking to solve when they want to have a drink. They want that little uplifting feeling. We call it a better high. And especially the next day, like even if you had a bit of a wild night but you focus on drinking only Junmai sake, you just feel different. You just realize, hey, I had a good time, but it doesn't hit me as hard the next day.
You don't have the big hangover.
Yeah, you don't.
But it's a little bit of a paradox. And just to frame our conversation here a little bit, you said it for health reasons, right? You discovered sake. Alcohol is still kind of something that affects your body very negatively and should always be kind of consumed maybe in moderations. But can you explain maybe a little bit more? Let's say if someone is going to drink because they want to just taste the different kind of beverages, why exactly is this affecting you differently? Or is Junmai affecting someone differently than if they had like a glass of whiskey, for example?
So there's two conversations. That one is, I had a phase for 6 months in my life where I didn't drink at all. And I'm very happy that I did. I still have moments where recently, as last year, I did 2 months without drinking. So I know how it feels to not drink, and there is some gains to it. So you're probably a little bit sharper. There's some interesting elements, but at the same time, I want to have a drink from time to time. That's a personal decision, and because I'm able to try both states, because if you're stuck into I can't go without it, that's a different conversation. I have the capacity to go without, so I know exactly what both do. I enjoy being able to switch. So when I'm in Japan, I drink more, and when I'm maybe outside of Japan, I try to take moments when I don't drink at all. But if you want to have a drink, and I think that there is some very beautiful, very poetic, very warming aspects of drinking that I think are part of the beauty of our existence on this planet. It goes back to the conversation of the fermentation. I think human beings in different ways are constantly looking for ways to enhance their presence and their perception and their existence in that specific moment. So yeah, I think if you're going to start looking at what alcohol does, so there's different levels to it. One is the actual alcohol content. It has to be broken down. So distilled alcohols are more aggressive, 40% alcohol versus a sake that will have on average around 15 degrees. It's just more to process. Also, the behaviors when you are drinking vodka or gin or whatever, your chances are you're going to add a sugary drink. So it's not, you can't just study the actual alcohol itself. You have to study the behavior around it. So also different people react to different things. Like me, when I would drink hard liquor, let's say, I would get sloppy. I would just be a bit of a different person. I think the methanol affects also the neurological system. It just makes you less sharp, you know. So if you can have the positive of drinking while removing a significant amount of the negative, that's where sake comes into play. So the low acidity is one, no sulfites. There's an entire conversation around amino acids and peptides that are in sake. So I would never suggest somebody who does not drink, I would never tell them, hey, look, maybe you should reconsider that choice. But somebody who does drink, I am 100% convinced that switching them at least part of their consumption to Junmai sake, you're doing them a favor.
That's quite interesting. I never really thought about this way. So you told me before we started recording that you used to work in the event world. So I guess events, evenings, people drink, and you kind of had a connection already with this world of beverage and kind of dealing with this. What made you kind of decide after maybe discovering sake as part of one of the beverages, and maybe for you feeling better physically while drinking Junmai sake, to start a brand?
So it was in different steps. First, I fell in love with it for myself. At no moment did I think, well, let's do a brand. I was still living in London, and you could not. We were talking about this is 15 years ago. So you could not buy alcohol online. So no sake online retailers like there is today, and there was also no supermarkets that carried like really good quality stuff. So you had to go into a Japanese restaurant and then take the cases as a takeaway, and have to negotiate with the restaurant owner. Say, look, I'm taking like 20 bottles, give me a deal, I'm not going to pay the restaurant price. So at some point I had my sake pusher restaurant that I would go and get my little stash from. So I would integrate it into my life, organize dinners at home, test it on date nights. It was very important for me, women, how do women react to it? Like, because I knew that if you wanted to create a sake revolution, you needed the women. It's essential.
In Japan today, it's still sometimes or often has this image of the old man's drink, right?
That's it. I'm sure we're going to get to that in a bit. But from my naive understanding at that point, also never really thinking about the actual Japanese market, although we now are sold in Japan now since November, which is a big step. But originally, the strategy did not involve thinking, well, you know, how do we market this to Japanese people? It was really about saying, well, okay, I've tested this now in my life for about a year and a half. Young people like it, older people like it, men, women. You can do cocktails, you can have a business lunch with it, you can drink it by the beach in the south of France. Burning Man is also an interesting thing we can talk about later. It just like ticked all the boxes. And on top, I found out that the sake industry was struggling. So that's quite important, because if the sake industry was booming, one, I wouldn't have thought that we could contribute anything to them, and they just wouldn't need us. And two, they would have also probably not been even interested to talk to us, to be like, oh, you try to go tell to tequila makers, unless you're a very famous actor or whatever.
Which is happening a lot at the moment.
That's another conversation, but that trend is a little bit breaking. So this whole concept of these celebrity brands is a bit fading. But so, you know, if you try to go, or maybe even today, if you try to go see certain breweries compared to 10 years ago, they will be like, well, when, you know, for the export market has its own momentum now. It's less valuable. There's also many new people coming in. And so it's a bit of a different time. But back then, the export was almost inexistent. So when we looked at the numbers, we said, hey, this is potentially the most versatile drink in the world, potentially the least harmful form of alcohol in the world. Japan is a dream, like culturally, if you have to sell it, in the sense, you know, if that's your storytelling, is you're trying to sell Japanese culture, you know, it's a no-brainer. And so we started talking to a few people in the industry, and I think we got very lucky to have access to amazing people who helped us almost from the beginning. And we felt like, okay, let's give this a try.
Sake is produced primarily in Japan. We briefly talked about it off camera. Some people maybe are making it now in the United States, for example, but generally it's made in Japan. You're based in London at the time. How do you go on about like starting this? And like you need to find producers, right, for your brand, and you also need to maybe develop a taste that you like. That is like, this is the one that I want to sell. What was your process to kind of get this all started?
Well, we got very lucky. I think we were in the right place at the right time. The fact that we were all French and that my partners were very connected with the fashion world. Back then, Dasai already had a local
the sake brand?
Yes, Dasai, who was our first producer, they had a local representative in Paris, a lady called Kaoru. I don't know if she was ever going to watch this, but she was one of the first women to recognize what we were working on. And because Dasai had a France strategy, they knew that if you want to start creating that new perception of sake, associating it with French cuisine, French culture, French joie de vivre, that little French Riviera, art, culture, fashion, that it would probably heighten the desirability and the playfulness and the elegance of sake. So us being French and having this vision of saying, well, this is where we want to bring our product, luxury, lifestyle, fashion, art, that resonated with them. And back then, there wasn't so many people knocking at the doors of breweries saying, hey, look, we're trying to do something fun and cool and sexy to help you guys. And they immediately understood the concept. Then the design of the bottle was an element that really was for them, wow, like, okay, these guys they understand luxury, they understand design. And so while at the same time being unique and different to what they were offering. So, and then the last thing was the product itself, the liquid. We knew that if we wanted to go and talk to the greatest sommeliers and greatest chefs and the greatest collectors of anything that we had access to, and wine specialists and car and wherever you name it, art people that are used to the highest standards of things, which is what sake to a certain degree needs. It needs a lot of other things, but you need to keep that perception of quality and heritage. I think is something that you should keep. We had to bring something to the table. Just bottling, having a nice bottle and saying, well, it's not enough. We wanted to really have an impact on the taste, a real story. And we, being French and studying all the different options that we had, we felt like, hey, I mean, the actual process of sake making, you could argue it is from an engineering standpoint, I'd say is perfect. It's been refined for 2,000 years. The Japanese are the most obsessive about perfection, attention to detail. Like it's just so. It's almost like you say, well, at no point in that process can we come in and tell them what to do or change this or do that without it being. It would have to make sense. Or
you can just work on the packaging. How do you sell it after?
Well, yes and no. This is where we had a very lucky inspiration, and which was using assemblage techniques and bringing them to sake. So there's a slight. It becomes very sometimes even philosophical. I have hour-long conversations with this. And actually, John Gottner is an interesting case. When we started bringing assemblage to sake, a lot of people, including John Gottner, saying, well, it's probably a bit gimmicky. It's like, what does it really do? Like, is it like blending? Because some breweries already use blending.
So assemblage in French means basically put together something. Yes. How does this apply to sake? Briefly explain.
So assemblage, you have to imagine it's like, I like to use the term musical composition. So most sakes today are just one batch, one flavor defined by the Toji master. And it's like I compare it to a really beautiful piano concert. Okay? You can sit for hours listening to absolute magnificent piano concerts and the masters of piano. And then there is the symphony, the opera, where you mix different. There's a piano, there's a violin, there's all these different instruments mixed together, and it's the harmony between these elements creating one that generates a certain level of vibration or whatever you want to call it, and stimulation inside of you that makes you feel like, oh wow, this is special, this is different. So assemblage is using, in our cases, we use the existing sakes of a brewery and create a new composition with these elements that were not originally developed as to be part of an assemblage. This is also something that is really powerful, is that we get all these really beautiful and highly respected breweries to let us do that with their liquids. So that's actually an interesting story. You asked me about little anecdotes of the sake making. It's always a little bit the same, but we know by now, so we're much more confident than we used to be. But the first one we did with Dasai, when people ask me when was Heaven Sake born, the real moment it was born in theory is when we went to see Dasai with our assemblage master Régis Camus, who's the most awarded champagne master of a generation. And although the owners of Dasai had agreed to the project, you need the production team to also respect what you're doing. You know, it's like knowing the owner of a restaurant, between him saying, "Oh, I like your product," and the actual sommelier who runs the business or is in charge of making sure what gets sold. If they are not behind you, it doesn't really matter that the owner says, "I like this product," because they are the guys that are going to be in charge of things. So it was a little bit the same with the breweries, where there is the owner or the management people, but then there's the people at the production level, and it's very, very important for us to have this harmony with them and this respect. We have the respect when we come already, but also for them in the beginning is a little bit like,
yeah, I can imagine, right? A group of Frenchmen arrive in a Japanese brewery and like, hey, we want to kind of do sake a little bit differently. Not the process, but like what we do after. If just to confirm, assemblage, if I understand it well, in whiskey would be like blending whiskeys,
yes,
kind of.
Yes.
And so you apply this to sake, which is not traditionally done.
Exactly.
How does the conversation go? You arrive at the sake brewery from Dasai and you talk with the Toji master and like, hey, so he's our champagne master, Régis Camus, and yes, we want to do this.
This is exactly what happens. And by now it's a completely different process in the sense of like they're much more welcoming, it's much more clear. And the track record of breweries that we've been working with now, the Nizawas, Noguchis of this world, Tatenokawa, they're so respected that it's a different energy now. But in the beginning, they were very sort of a bit. They were intrigued, at the same time a bit like suspicious, and so that's the beauty of it, was the evolution from day 1, day 2, day 3 of the assemblage. So day 1, a bit skeptical, a bit like a dry energy, and then day 2, they understand when you see the process of how Régis works and how the taste evolves of what he's doing, and how sometimes even changing 1% has such a massive impact on the actual outcome. You're like, oh wow, this is not just a little gimmicky thing. And at the end, which is the moment that matters the most, is when the Toji and Régis both say, yes, okay, we found it. Because there's no, if Régis says this is it, and the Toji is sort of like, okay, well, yeah, let's do it. It's not the approach that we want. We want them to be like, okay, wow, and and so far, every time it happens, sometimes a bit quicker, sometimes we had to stay there for quite a few days. But that's the magic of assemblage. And John Gartner, who was a very, very critical, old school, tough guy, the way he should be. We were very, very lucky that, in the beginning he was skeptical. So at some point I said, look, we're doing an assemblage session with Noguchi, a 92-year-old sake god, which is what is going into this bottle. Please come and experience one of our assemblage sessions. And here's the deal. I will have video cameras and photo cameras, and we're going to document the entire process. If you find it that it is marginal, you can attend, and we will not use any of your photos or images, and because you are totally allowed to say, look, I am, it's nice that I experienced it, but I remain in my position. If it turns out that you find out that assemblage is actually a real thing, it has a real impact and raison d'être, please let me have you on camera confirming that. They said, okay, let's make a deal. And so now if you go to our Instagram, you see there's a video about the launch of Heaven Sake in Japan. And there is one assemblage session that we did at Noguchi with John Gottner, and he admitted that assemblage is a real thing. So
one of the things we talked about with John Gardner is that there's 10,000 ways to make sake, and everyone is kind of unique and so on. How do you keep then this process of assemblage consistent to create your flavors, your flavor profiles for Heaven Sake?
Sure. So the first step is chewing. I'm gonna edit this one.
We can edit this one.
The first one is choosing. There's a few steps. The first one is obviously choosing the brewery. So the way we go on about choosing a brewery is we need to enjoy the taste of their creations, because you cannot, if somebody does a specific kind of sake, even with assemblage, you can't do something that is 180 degrees different. They would probably also not welcome it so much. So that's part of the art, is how do you create something different and unique while at the same time respecting sort of the aura and the identity of that brewery. So and so the selection of the brewery is one step, and then the entire process is the magic of Regis. Like in the case of Noguchi, we started with, I think, something like 45 different sake. And really, it's narrowing down. Once you've narrowed down the elements, is playing to find the right balance. And so there is a very specific Heaven Sake taste profile, which is a very flowery nose, floral nose, a fruity taste, something a bit playful. The texture also is important, like a silky texture. And then the length. That's really important for Regis. He's all about the length. So what happens once you've swallowed it? Like how long does it still linger a little bit inside your mouth? So that's very coming from his understanding of wine and champagne specifically. Length is very important. So that's something that we're very, very focused on.
So you have this idea 15 years ago in London. You test general sake brands with your friends, host parties, see if people are interested, and you kind of really get into this for health reasons. You find a few partners, and you find an entry point into the Dasai brewery, one of Japan's biggest and most well-respected. And suddenly you're here in Japan and you start making your first few assemblage. But the big question is, how do you package this and how do you sell this back overseas, right? Because you just said you only started selling in Japan, and we'll get to this later, last November. So your primary market was overseas, but people still don't know about this. They don't know the health benefits, they don't understand the flavor profile, and they don't understand what to do with sake. What was the next step? How do you kind of define all this?
Well, I looked into the history of alcohol revolutions. There's actually not that many. So there is the Absolute Vodka revolution from the, I would say, let's say early 90s. So they took a Polish-Russian drink, Swedish company, in quite a bit of difficult times, in the sense like vodka, was associated to the Russian and Cold War, and so for Absolute to even say, hey, look, let's try to make vodka cool and sexy and fun, was not necessarily could have been, it was quite risky, let's say, but there was also much more of an open market for people to create new things back then also. Then there is Patron Tequila with the tequila category. I think it's very well documented. There's books around how they did it. More recently, the rosé has gone through a bit of a revolution. So it went from a very specific south of France or summer destination, afternoon lunch thing, to something much more broad in the US. Canned rosés, all the suburban moms. It's interesting, actually, if you find the whole history of different alcohol brands and categories, how they had their breakthrough moments. It's quite fascinating. What was clear is that, okay, you need a strong brand. You need ideally an iconic or potentially iconic bottle shape. Iconic arrives over time. Like you don't know in the beginning for sure how the consumer is going to welcome it, but you need to say, hey, how do I create something that has a certain timelessness, a certain character, a certain elegance, a certain desirability. So it's a lot of different things together that you need to be able to touch. It can't just be like, there's so many things out there. I mean, the skull-shaped bottles and dragon with golden dust alcohols, and you name it. It's endless. So how do you do enough? How do you not do too much? That sometimes it's a bit so. The name is very important. It needs to be something that people can remember, that gives them a sense of positive, some form of positive reaction. So it's not an exact science. It's actually also the reason why big groups cannot create brands like LVMH or Diageo or you name it. They are incapable of creating brands. Why they acquire those, because figuring out what is going to be sort of like creating emotions in the consumer is impossible. Like you're way better off letting first these 100 guys that are trying to make this happen fight it out for a few years, and then out of these 100 you're going to have 15 to 20 that sort of start emerging, and you start seeing, okay, well, they seem to have touched the nerves of the consumer a little bit, and so that's usually when these groups arrive and start.
So the big corporations don't have the kind of creative resources to really establish the brands directly themselves, because maybe their approach to the business is different, and passionate people like you will kind of really go down the rabbit hole to figure out what's perfect, and once you are successful, they will just kind of buy the brand. Is this a general business model of the beverage industry?
Yes and no. There's exceptions of brands that remain independent. A lot of wineries remain independent. Clase Azul, the most successful tequila in the world, I think, when I'm certain, depending on how you look at it, but as an independent company. So it's a broad landscape, but in general, I think it's a bit more complex than what these big companies can and can't do. I think it's more linked also to the reality of how society works. We want to have always new things. We want to have sort of real stories. And the Absolute Elix is one good example. Absolute, at some point, they were looking at the market situation saying, well, Grey Goose and Belvedere are killing the let's say, premiums vodka game, and we're losing market share. We're being perceived with our product as sort of cheap vodka. We need to do an Absolute Elix. And you would assume that a company like Absolute that has, I mean, the creative power they have, the networking power they have, the financial power they have, the leverage, I mean, they have everything, the data, everything. And for all I know, I'm sorry, Absolute, I think for all I know, Absolute Elix is not a success, because it's not, it's what is going to touch the nerve of the consumer and of society in a specific moment.
Is this what you would define a brand? Something that touches the nerve of the consumer and the society at a given time?
I would say you need that moment. Once it's been sort of created, a perception is there, then there's fluctuations, and afterwards when big corporations take it, they can sort of like amplify this in a different way. But yeah, there needs to be something where you're like, okay, between the actual object, so the object needs to speak by itself. So the branding, that entire thing, needs to have that perception really quick, because people don't have time to analyze it too much. It's not a process. It's like art. It's not a process where if you have to explain to the consumer for 10 minutes why this is supposed to touch him, you're done. Like, it's not something that you
missed the point.
Yeah, like it needs to. Then when they realize, oh, it stimulates me for whatever reason, and then go to research how much depth there is to it. That's an essential moment, whether somebody decides to say, well, I'm going to be your client for the rest of my life, or say, oh, it's interesting, I tasted it, it's fun, I'm out to the next one.
So you need this kind of story, and you need to communicate this clearly to the customer. What was it that you saw at this time when this was launched? This is going to be our angle for this brand.
Definitely the mix between France and Japan as a cultural exchange. I think it was important for various reasons, which I can go a little bit deeper into. And the design of the bottle. design of the bottle was
So
something
this one right here.
Yeah, this is an evolution. This is now something we did with a great ceramic producer in Saga. Arita Yaki is an absolute legend of ceramics and porcelain. But the original bottle, which still exists, the Heaven Sake glass bottle, was much more minimal and simple, but in the good sense of it. This is a much more elaborate luxury product, but the shape is the same. So we added this element to as an element of artistic expression, and
the bottom,
the porcelain and ceramic that is like still raw. That's a sensory element. So it's this is something that means a lot to me. But originally it was really much more simple.
So first the design of the bottle, and the cultural exchange between France and Japan. How do you know where to find your market? Very early on in our conversation, we talked about sake being the old man's drink here in Japan, or at least perceived to be. And you said it's super important that women are also interested in this. If you want a successful beverage brand, you need to also have women interested in the drink. How do you figure out how to do this with sake?
So first you have to define what is the most important market to crack, and then there is no conversation. It's the US. Like they are much more advanced and open-minded for trends. Like you said, like the French and the Italians, they have such a strong emotional connection with their own products, the wines, the champagnes, the proseccos, the beers, and also which then creates amazing products for very accessible price, in the sense that you will find amazing white wines in France for 15 euros, but really, really great quality products. So to then tell a French guy, okay, well, look, for 45 euros, you'd get an equivalent of that sort of same great thing, but between the import, the shipping, and so on, and everybody's who's in between adding their margins compared to a product that can go sometimes directly from the winery to your local guy.
Supermarket, yeah.
It's just a completely different math. So you end up having a product, So to go back to the US. The U.S. is a completely different. It's a monster in a good sense of it. And so the size of the market, the open-mindedness of the market, the fact that sake is already there. They have their own breweries. I mean, there's a lot of breweries in the U.S. Actually. So you were starting from a sort of already a better cultural understanding and open-mindedness. On top now, if you project it down the line, the work that you do in the US has repercussion and trickles down to the other markets. So if something becomes a hit in Milan, Paris, and Berlin, New York, Miami, and LA are probably not going to care. Whereas if something becomes a hit in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, that ecosystem this creates in the content online, and celebrities starting to drink it, and that then makes it a thing suddenly much more in London, which then makes it a thing in Berlin, which makes it a thing in Milan. There's an entire cycle which you can study with the tequila. That's just the way it works. It starts in the U.S. and then suddenly and it's a thing before before Milan recognizes something as a thing. It has been already a thing in London maybe for 5 years, and then so it's like a bit.
Yeah.
Now things are a bit faster because of social media, but consumer behavior, in the influence and the change of consumer behavior is a very slow process, which also creates a protection for your business in the future. So the beginning phase that you could consider a suffering is what creates the value in the future, because anybody that comes after you and says, well, let me do that too, there's almost no way to sort of, act. I'm talking about another category now suddenly showing up and try to take the space of sake, if and ever sake becomes the new hot thing at scale, which I believe it will, but it takes time.
So you need to crack the US market. They have a little bit of sake there. It's more popular than in Europe, but it's still a beverage. If you put this on a menu, people know, okay, well, this is a beverage from Japan. But for you, what got you into it was the health benefits. You can't really communicate this on a menu when you're at the restaurant, and you can't or you can hardly explain the flavor profile unless you have maybe a sommelier, a sake sommelier that can stand there next to the customer and explain, you're going to drink this, pair it with fish or with this or that. How do you approach kind of communication around this drink to get people interested in trying this instead of going with a typical California Napa Valley wine or something like this?
So there's two approaches to this. One is, first, at the scale of the US market, the actual amount of restaurants where they already sell some form of sake. You talk about all the Japanese restaurants, all the Asian fusion restaurants, all
Nobu,
the Chinese restaurants, a lot of restaurants are Asian, sort of some way, somehow Asian-inspired restaurants. So that's your backbone. Like, and from the beginning, it was clear that we had to have a proposition that if we were to go see 100 sommeliers of great restaurants in New York, that a certain amount of them will be like, hey, this is actually perfect. It's very beautiful. I like the name. The sake tastes great. The price is fair, and it's going to resonate with my clientele. So that was, if you don't have that, then yeah, it becomes very difficult. But that's sort of your backbone. And then you can start branching out, saying, okay, we already have that credibility and that network and sort of that recurring business from that part. Now let's see where else it can go. Some of it you can control yourself. Some of it you have to expect that there is momentum around the category. So that's very important. The difference between when we started, even maybe around 6 years ago, pre-corona, and today, it's already day and night. So the understanding, the interest, the amount of brands, the amount of sort of celebrities that are going towards sake, the occasions that we get asked for to donate sake, art shows, fashion shows, Burning Man. It's the cool drink of the moment. So that sort of, because tequila is it's the big leading.
It's already
thing.
mainstream.
Yeah, it's
here's something new.
Yes.
You mentioned Burning Man twice already. What's the story with this?
Well, actually, it turns out that in Burning Man, the best alcohol for Burning Man is actually Japanese sake. And I just discovered this a few years ago. But basically, there's many stories. But one story is an old lady that her contribution to the pie, she has a truck and she fills it up with sake and she sets up her sake stand and she exchanges sake with the people. And the reason why that is a success is exactly because of low acidity. You can drink it warm, cold. The temperature changes in Burning Man. It goes with many other things that people consume in these sort of festival settings. So it's not that strong on you. So it's a nice little. And when you want to go for several days in a row, which weddings are a good example of these circumstances where sort of you say, okay, 2-3 days. Sake does exactly what you want it to do. Put you in that nice little zone of also be a little bit relaxed and be a bit joyful, make you maybe disconnect from certain things that may be otherwise troubling you, and allows you to maybe feel the music a little bit better, get into a nice little energy, without taking you over the edge. If you know how to pace yourself, obviously it's still alcohol, so you need to be smart and respectful of the drink, but Burning Man, actually, a lot of the DJs, which I'm very lucky to have some of them as my friends through the years of my work in the event space and F&B industry, they really like that little nice little high that it gives, because sometimes they have to mix for like 3, 4, 5 hours in a row.
Many hours.
So they want something that gets them into that little mellow vibe, happy mellow, and yeah, sake is a thing at Burning Man.
How did you end up getting the woman-based customer on board and kind of break this image that this is a man's drink? Or was this maybe not an issue when starting overseas?
We have not yet sort of hyper-tailored our communication on women. So it's not something that we think right now. We've been doing all the groundwork, which is having the distribution network, having these relationships with great accounts and great chefs, and one of the next sort of strategic steps or marketing steps, for lack of a better word, would be to think, okay, how do we go on more about creating the connection with women. But at the moment, we try to stay a little bit sort of neutral, create sort of the luxury perception with always a bit of touch of playfulness. And that's already been quite successful. I don't think that women always necessarily require or even welcome sort of like, tailored women's marketing. It's like either you have that little touch and magic that they find sexy and appealing, or you don't. You can obviously amplify it and play with it. But I think it was in the beginning also the shape of the bottle, for example. Like we had a big argument. One of my partners originally was like, okay, like he wanted that massive sort of like, heritage, and I wanted
Thin and
elegance,
elongated.
thin and like thing. And so yeah, those things like the name Heaven, it's soft, it's gentle, so we do think about how to at least stay sort of couples friendly, that it's not too masculine, not too feminine, so it's a bit of a balance.
The brand turns 10 next year, so in 2026, and this sake is produced by different breweries across Japan, who are also probably trying to expand their market. We started this conversation saying, and you saw an opportunity in the decreasing or retracting sake market. Don't they feel now that they are missing out on something? Has this ever led to any kind of conflict that they're producing sake for you and you kind of basically now kind of seizing the market with your brand overseas? Or is this a win-win for everyone?
No, I think it's a win-win for everyone. We had one circumstance with Dasai where their demand was growing a lot and our demand was growing a lot too, and they had an issue with manpower because they were really like they had a lot of demand, and so it became a math calculation for them. Say, well, look, every bottle we produce for you is a bottle that we cannot satisfy for somebody else. And even if you are making the same amount of money on our bottle, theirs, even maybe if you make more money selling to us, the negative of not being able to satisfy the demand of your customer has a negative cost. So that was the only time where there was a bit of a conflict, but we resolved this very, very amicably, and I have only great things to say about Dasai because they believed in us, and they were very important in our original acceptance in the markets. They were sort of like they had giving us their stamp of approval. So and even the way we parted was very, very elegant. I have really a lot of respect and gratitude for them. But so today it's really, I mean, you have to think the total export of sake to the world, the value of that export is $300 million. To give you an idea, the local market is about 6 billion. The total export of wine out of France is 15 billion. So it's 50 times bigger. There is no reason why wine out of France should be 50 times a bigger market than say 10 times, 20 times. Okay. But this product is more versatile. I believe healthier. Has just as good as of a history and taste. Red wine is a masterpiece. Also, I'm French, so I have a lot of admiration. And it's on a date night with your wife or a girlfriend. It's an absolute dream to be able to have a beautiful bottle of red wine. So I'm not against that. It's just saying, on grand scheme of things, 50 times bigger export does not make sense. So what we're trying to say is like, okay, the exports out of Japan should be 3 times what they are today. Let's say, $1 billion export value. That, it's not, even that is not that big because the 15 billion are just France. That's not counting Italy, not counting, South Africa, or all the countries that are exporting wines. Just so the market should be, I would say, 3 times that. For this to happen, you need a few iconic brands that put sake on the map. Could be us, could be other brands. But what happens when somebody like Patron Tequila did this to tequila, whatever, is that the sudden demand cannot be satisfied by any one player. It's just not possible. Even if I could cover 5% of that demand. what needs to happen is not people fighting for the same cake size right now, which is what is happening. So it's everybody fighting for what is the sake cake today. My conversation with everyone is say, no, you need to be thinking of how the cake gets bigger, because then anybody that is today having a size of that cake, when it triples that size, you're going to have at least potentially the same amount of percentage of the bigger pie. So if you have 10% of the market today, if you have 10% of the market when it's 3 times bigger, then it's up to you to be better and go to 15% of that. But I'm interested in how to make the size of the thing, and it's clear what needs to happen. You need a bit of time because it's a slow process to change consumption behavior. You need iconic brands and bottles that create an emotion in the people. They want to have it at the table. They want to show off it. They want to take it home. They want to post it on Instagram. The object is really part of the experience. I would say you need celebrity power, but it doesn't have to be in the form of the owner thing. It could be like, stupid example, but LeBron James at some point posted about a red wine he really likes, and it exploded. Mm-hmm. So sometimes having just genuine people just enjoying that and saying, hey, that's just my drink of choice. And I know by now of many, many celebrities that really love sake. Like whether they would go on and do a deal for it, there's another conversation. But it's clear that in the LA sort of cool, health conscious, trendy, influential celebrities, a lot of them, one of which being Hailey Bieber, for example. Hailey Bieber loves sake, walks around with her own sake bottle all the time. So she's a big sake fan. People like this that are highly influential, have a good network, and so when you start having people like this that start saying, hey, sake is just like, it's my drink of choice, and then it has an impact on whoever else comes after. And creativity, I think creativity is very important. I think you have to have the right kind of strategic and creative brains together that take what is already happening and maybe accelerate it or amplify it.
You talked about growing the pie so that the sake industry can benefit from this. I recall from my earlier conversations with Julia or John Gontner, the number of sake breweries has been shrinking. So yes. I'm imagining production capacity also is shrinking, and domestic production or domestic consumption has also been on a decline. So how do you grow a market when the production capacity of this is actually kind of shrinking?
So you have to really imagine what the landscape of these breweries are. So you need to imagine a bit like a pyramid, let's say. So already today there is sake companies that make a lot of money. All that are very luxurious, and that even if we call them and say, hey, we want to buy it, and they'd be like, hey, we cannot even keep up with our demand, and they hang up the phone on you. So there is very successful sake breweries. There's also very big ones that make that volume and make money. So the ones that are closing and disappearing are very often small breweries, sort of family owned, with much depth from the past. So you can't really take them over, very complex family structure. So even if one part of the family wants to sell, the other part is making it difficult. So it's very, very complex. So now is a bit of an intermediary phase, where when we started, the category was like not on a map. It was depressing. Like when we started, I was walking around trying to tell people, oh, you want to drink some sake? They looked at me like, look, this guy, he lost the plot. When I said, oh, people are going to be drinking sake in the south of France. And I mean, delusional. Now it's like day and night. So already that shift. But I'm in a sort of hyper specific circles and sort of like very trendy, a little bit ahead of the trends. And sometimes these trends, they from the moment when I start seeing that some people like whatever, Hailey Bieber or whoever are onto the sake game, until this actually trickles down onto mass scale acceptance, you can talk about another 3 to 5 years. So it hasn't really hit the market on the level of small breweries yet. What is for sure happening is that, and I know this because I get calls all the time, a lot of external investors are coming in, try to see if they can buy breweries. So there's momentum building, new brands coming up that need these productions. So, but then that's the issue. Is like even if you have a new brand, you're not going to go to a brewery that is a mess or that doesn't speak any English or that doesn't have the capacity to produce at scale. Because if you're going to invest into a brand and those stuff, then you need to know, well, okay, I'm happy to do it with you, but what happens if it becomes a success and suddenly I need like 30, 40,000 bottles? And I'd be like, well, I do not have that capacity. So you say, okay, so already you're not an option for me unless you say, no, I want to do hyper exclusive luxury sake and I only want to do 10,000 bottles and with that brewery, but either that brewery has already sort of a name and a magic to it and then it's not struggling, or it's sort of a no-name place and then you'd have to, either build the reputation from scratch or go and look into the archives and see if there's something that you could sort of like, rebrand.
Do you feel that this approach of kind of investing and scaling up production, making these new brands, is what these big corporations like Diageo and so on are doing in a very Western approach, and perhaps in conflict with what these traditional and local family breweries have been doing maybe now for centuries, where they've mostly sold their sake locally to the local restaurants and so on, and that these approaches are not compatible to really turn this into a business, except for already large, well-established sake breweries like Dasai?
No, I mean, there's a few issues with them. We speak to a lot of these groups on a regular basis for various reasons. And so first, sake is much more sensitive than people know. So especially if you go into the high end of Jumai.
In terms of the production process and getting the...
No, the actual end product. So the sake is sensitive to heat, sensitive to time, and sensitive to light. So for big companies like Diageo, when they start looking into the supply chain, the logistics, the storage, the time pressure, it's like, okay, if your stock can if you don't have enough rotation, your stock can be worthless at some point, or just have a bit of a taste that you're like, well, it's not scandalous, it's still drinkable.
It's not the assemblage we got
but
at
it's
the
yeah,
beginning.
but it's not yeah. So the color changes, so it becomes a little bit yellowish. So it's a tricky thing for big groups that are used to having these cases of vodka that can lay around for months. It's a bit of a different mass. So also, I think these guys they need to be 100% sure that something is really established, because if they jump after every trend, it becomes a bit. But they have some small investment vehicles, like independent companies that are in charge of going to speak and invest small tickets into emerging brands and non-alcoholic and so being. But I think sake is a very complex product. So it's still in the phase now where sake is on the map of every single group. This is clear. But they're still a little bit like cautious. Also because the demand is very specific to mostly to Asian accounts. And so, it's also they have their own little systems and people they like to work with. So it's still a bit in a transition phase. So, but it's exciting. I think it's either you go into established categories and then you're fighting against massive groups and massive brands that have so much budget, and so that you have to fight that kind of battle, or you go in an unknown field where you have much more freedom and it's much more different challenges, but you're going to have massive challenge in both cases. And I have a better, or I would never promote hard liquors. Like, it's just not the reason to exist for having sake is the fact that we felt the difference physically and mentally drinking Jumai sake versus other sake. And then it so happens that the industry needed young, fresh brands to help it. Otherwise, we would probably not have been here. But we really want to offer people the healthiest or least harmful form of alcohol there is.
So a group of Frenchmen takes a champagne-making approach to Japanese breweries to create a new wave of sake to be sold overseas. And now, nearly 10 years after the launch, you actually brought this brand to Japan last year in November. How do you bring this to Japan? Like if Japan foreign-made drink that is traditionally Japanese back to its home country. You talked about the cultural mix between France and Japan. How was your approach to make this happen?
Actually, we didn't really make it happen. It happened by itself. I think it's not something, especially with Japanese, that you can make happen. You know, it's something where you have to have that longevity, that stability, that history, that respect, and for them to say, okay, we welcome you into our market. There's a few things that come together. First, they know that new things need to happen in the category. So that's definitely one thing that by now is clear to everyone. So there's an open-mindedness to something like this. Two, we work with some of the most respected breweries, and since day one we share their name. We hype them up, which is there's been some projects in the past where they had good breweries, but they would hide the name to sort of focus on their brand. And we were always about sharing our success with the different breweries, celebrating them, the people behind them. So that's something that I think was also they were very proud of, because if we had our approach like, yeah, just produce for us, and we'll just be like, hey, look, this we're good, and not share that admiration and the exposure that we get with them, I think they would also have perceived our project a little bit different. So that's also very important, the fact that we work with these breweries. And so to any distributor, which is the key to an alcohol brand to a certain degree, it's like, oh, okay, when I see these names, there is no space for, there's no real argument to be made about the quality of the product. So it was really about the consistency of what we were building, and at some point we found a great partner called Imadea, who has what I believe to be the best sake shop in the world, in Ginza 6. So we got along very well. We, through a common friend who's been an advocate of the Heaven Sake project since the beginning, a sake samurai lady, absolutely wonderful, called Natsuki, and that I have also a lot of gratitude for, because she's been really helping us so much. She connected us with Imadea, and we connected very well. They understood what we were trying to do. They liked the design, and so it was about obviously the assemblage, which now, by the way, when you go to luxury sake shops, there is quite a few sake bottles now that literally spell assemblage on the bottle. So you
might be this trendsetter in the field.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, this is clear. This is we I mean, this is the math is clear, but we're very happy for that. But so this is an important element. The fact that it's French. If we were maybe an Italian co-branded Italian sake, or German, my grandfather's German, so I'm allowed to think, or whatever other country, maybe the Japanese have a very specific perception of French luxury, French lifestyle, and I think that helps sort of, because marketing we discussed before, or whatever, the design, branding, it needs to be like instant. It's not something where you can.
Because when you see this bottle on a shelf, yes, especially in Japan, and you put it next to any other typical of the 1,000 different sake bottles you can see, it doesn't look like a sake bottle. A typical consumer might even overlook it for, oh, maybe this is like hard liquor, or maybe this is just something else. What is the clientele like? What was the reception to kind of launching this year?
In Japan? So I was not in the mind of the people that saw it for the first time. What we can evaluate is, obviously when we did our launch event, how people reacted to it, the media. I think the proposition is pretty clear. I think it's very important, and we discussed this before, the efficiency of what you're trying to bring across. You don't have the time to explain. When people want to know more, it's important that you have all that depth. But the first interaction, so it's... I think throughout the world, the bottle has been our very strong element of differentiation and emotional reaction. So It's been so far always very well received. So I think Japanese people also understand. They have a very good eye for design, and so far it's only been an absolute dream.
So approaching the 10 years now, you have now this new bottle redesigned. You have penetrated the Japanese market as well, and you talked about scaling this, increasing the size of the cake. What are the next big plans for Heaven's Sake? What can we expect? Are you going to open your own brewery to kind of get full control of the production process, or?
No, I don't think opening up our own breweries at the moment an option. It's a very complex thing to own, to operate. I'm not against it. I speak to different people, so if the moment ever comes, I think it's an option. At the same time, I enjoy the relationships that I have with all these breweries. Really, enormously. We actually just created a new Junmai Ginjo or label azure with a brewery called Shichiken. That is absolutely fantastic, and so we're launching it. I don't know when this is airing, but on April 11th we're doing a big event in Tokyo. If you
so it will have been launched already. The event will have been long gone by the time this airs.
Okay,
but people can then find
you're welcome to join us if you want. So
thank you.
So maybe one day, if doing a joint venture with the brewery maybe is an option, but it would be probably a brewery that we already work with, depending on how circumstances go. So I'm not against it, but it's not a strategy at the moment. At the moment, the plan is really like, how do you make this big sake pie triple its size? And there is. I think we are very lucky to live in times where through social media you can have this connection directly with people that are receptive to these kind of things. It's not as easy as people think always. Be like, oh, let's do an ad and type in sake lovers. It's a bit more complex, but it's really about how do you now break sake into mainstream culture, which I'm confident somehow it will happen no matter what. So I like to visualize these as imagine it's like a massive train, like it and it's so heavy and it just like it's so slow to move. And when we started, the train didn't even have barely had wheels on it. So now, and what I see at least is the machine is moving. It's clear. You had quite a bit of celebrities that have sakes now. Pharrell Williams has a sake. Brooklyn Beckham at some point had a sake. Kate Blanchett has a sake. We get requests from celebrities all the time to invest into Heaven Sake. So it's happening. It's clear that there's this momentum is building. So it could be that it's already just a question of time. So that if we sit together 3 years or 5 years, that we'll already, even if we were to disappear, that it's just like once the train has sort of left the station, you cannot stop it anymore. But obviously, if there's ways to make it quicker and make it bigger in a more interesting way, and in a way that we are one of the brands that are part of that revolution, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
Many interesting projects to come. I think we can expect a lot more from Heaven Sake and all your projects. We'll see you probably on social media blowing up, maybe the launch event soon. Do you feel like we covered it pretty well?
That was pretty good. I mean, I don't know what else you had in your little...
No, I actually didn't look at the list of questions I had prepared at all, but this was super interesting about the story of how this kind of came to be, and basically a foreign-made Japanese brand, so to say, if I can phrase it like that. I don't know if this is accurate, but I hope this brings new light on this traditional industry, and maybe also an inspiration for other industries here in Japan that sometimes could be struggling from being too outdated. But thank you so much for coming, making time to see us, share your story and how this brand came to be. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.